Okay, here we go. Hey guys, it's episode 25 of Stand Up. Today's question is, can you learn how to be a good or better parent? Hello friends, and welcome to the classroom of life that is Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where every show we do our best to fight apathy and ignorance, learn together from our expert guests and interesting people about the issues and ideas that matter to you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. I think it's appropriate that episode 25 of Stand Up with me, Pete Dominic, comes out on the 25th of December. Jesus' birthday, everybody. By the way, if you haven't listened to the last episode, I highly recommend it. Getting lots of great feedback on my conversation with April Rain about the value of welcoming diversity and inclusivity into our lives and our workplaces. Back to today's episode, we asked the question, can you learn how to be a good or better parent? Parenting is hard. Hell, life is hard. But I decided that when I became a father, I wanted to be the best dad I could be. When I found out I was going to be a father, I definitely wasn't ready. I was obsessed with my career and my relationship was actually broken. But I recognized my responsibility, and more importantly, I recognized an opportunity. When I found out I was having a daughter, I was even more paranoid because I just assumed, well, I was going to have a son, right? I mean, I have a brother, I'm a guy. What did I know about girls? After Ava was born, that changed. I read everything I could get my hands on about how to raise confident girls to be confident women, but to be honest, I probably didn't need to because there was no way that my girls seeing their mother operate through daily life, they'd be anything but strong. When Val got pregnant again, I was actually now afraid I might have a boy. I was so happy to have another girl. My girls are really different. They require a different style of communication. My relationships with them are different and special, but I have to recognize those variations in who they are so that I can relate to them and meet them where they are at and who they are and see them for everything holistically that they are. Today, I welcome two women who I hope my daughters grow up to be just like. They'll help us be better parents. First, Dr. Adelia Moore, who's a psychologist and author of the book Being the Grownup, Love Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenting. And then after my conversation with Dr. Moore, I have a great chat with Angie Hanscom, who is the author of another great book called Balanced and Barefoot, How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. She's also the creator of TimberNook, which is an awesome program that helps get kids outside, connected to nature, and learning in nature. So, let's get it started, shall we? Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Thanks for subscribing, giving us a great rating, and subscribing on Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Now my conversation with Dr. Adelia Moore. Very excited to have my guest joining me today on the phone. Her name is Dr. Adelia Moore. She is a clinical psychologist, writer, folk artist, mother, and grandmother. She specializes in therapy with couples, parents of children of all ages, and families. And she has a brand new book called Being the Grownup, Love, Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenthood. As a young woman, she had the great and very unique honor of being a guest on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I think I can play a little bit of that for you. Take a listen.
Adelia.
Hi.
Hi, Adelia.
How are you?
Good. I'd like you to know my television neighbor.
Hi. Wouldn't you like to come in?
Yes.
I'm sewing now.
Oh, good. Come on.
How about that? She recently wrote about that experience for the Atlantic magazine. I'm so happy to have her to talk about her work, her new book, and how we can all learn from it. Dr. Adelia Moore, welcome to the Stand Up podcast. I'm so happy to have you in my neighborhood.
Thank you. It's always funny for me to hear that because it's almost 40 years ago, and I think my voice has changed a bit. And I've also moved around a lot, so I think that my inflections have changed a little bit too. But it's fun. It's definitely me.
You wrote about that experience for the Atlantic magazine. I think the point being the way that Fred Rogers was able to pay attention to children. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and your article before we get to the book?
Yes. I moved to Pittsburgh in 1978 because my husband was taking a job as a law professor at the University of Pittsburgh Law School. And we had, I think, just two kids. We had two kids at the time. And I got to know a woman who was a producer and writer for the show named Elizabeth Siemens. And she thought that, they're always looking for neighbors or talent, as they call it. And she thought that I'd be someone that Mr. Rogers would enjoy visiting. So she created an episode for him to visit, and he did. And as you heard in the little clip, he literally comes to my house, knocks on the door. We went upstairs to my sewing room, and actually we had to move my sewing room from one room to another because for the cameras, my sewing room was tiny. But be that as it may, it took a day to film those 15 minutes. But during the time, I was quite aware that there was an audience, but I'd never done it before, and it was an honor to be with him. He was a lovely man who was very much in person the way he was across the camera, which was his great gift. And as we went around my sewing room looking at the things I'd made and a couple things that had been given to me that other people had made, I felt great that he was paying attention to me and my work. I knew there were kids listening, and I tried to, adjust what I said to think about them. But what I didn't know, and what I wrote about in the article and then sort of jumped off from, was, I knew it in a way, but when I watched the episode then and when I watch it still, he was turning every little while to look at the camera. He was paying, I felt, full attention to me,
right,
my stuff. But then he would turn to the camera and sort of give a little smile. Didn't say anything most of the time. Sometimes a little later, there were maybe a couple times that he did. But the point was, he was connecting with what he always described as one child on the other side of the screen. I don't know how many millions watched him, but for him, there was one. And all the coverage that he's gotten in this last year and a half with the documentary and then this film and lots of 50th anniversary tributes, I thought there was something missing. People talked about his kindness, his empathy, his ability to talk about tough feelings, his wisdom. But I thought there was something almost more fundamental, which was literally just paying attention. And that was something I benefited from being with him, and that parents would benefit by remembering. And I'm talking about not necessarily intensive attention. I'm not talking about helicoptering. I'm talking about engaging with your kid. Could be with eye contact, could be with a hug, could be with a chat, in the car. Would mostly need to be putting your screen down. But I'm not emphasizing screens per se. I'm just emphasizing what we all need as humans and what children literally need to develop well, to thrive.
You write in this article, when parents pay attention to their children as Mr. Rogers did, with genuine curiosity, they tend to focus more on what is happening between them and their children and less on their own stresses and to-do lists. If they can establish a pattern of responsiveness, they can do what Mr. Rogers did with his sweater, shoes, and song and build up the sense of security that kids need to thrive. What do you mean? Give me an example of engaging or paying attention to your children with genuine curiosity.
Well, I've gone around speaking about my book quite a bit in the last few months at bookstores and schools and libraries. And often I get a few questions, and sometimes they're a little hard because there I am, a clinician, but I'm in a public space. And so I have to be sensitive to, what this parent might want or might not want to reveal.
Right.
But we'll discuss an issue a little bit like, actually, just today, my dermatologist was asking me a question. She's just bought my book, and she has a 9-year-old, and she was asking about participation in sports and how much she had to be involved with it. And I said, have you, and that he wasn't that motivated. And I said, have you asked him about it? And she kind of said, and this is what I keep on coming around to when I talk to parents, whatever the issue is, small or large, is, do you know what he thinks about that or she thinks about that? Right. I often say he because I have boys. So it's really being curious about this other person with whom you have a relationship. Parenthood is a relationship. And this is why I think I only use the word parenting once in my book to say, this isn't a book about parenting. This is a book about parenthood, which is a condition of life and then a relationship with another person. And we all could spend more time being curious about what other people feel, our spouses, our children, our employees, our colleagues, maybe not our bosses necessarily.
Is it as simple as asking questions? I fear simplifying anything in this conversation and about your book because there's so much specificity, and I'm really enjoying it. Again, the book is Being the Grownup: Love, Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenthood. Is it just making time and making an effort to ask questions to show that you're genuinely interested in your kid and their struggles or their interests? Yeah. And even doesn't even have to be big deal interests or big deal ambitions in life. And I can imagine the parents saying, yeah, I say how was school today? And they say, fine. So then what do I do? So, it's not going to always happen easily. Let me broaden the discussion a little bit, if I could, in two ways. One is that there are lots of ways to pay attention. Curiosity is certainly one. And you want to think about not any particular moment, but what's your pattern over time? Does your kid really feel heard, noticed, recognized, that you at least haven't made an effort to understand them? But I also want to say that the reason, after spending several years thinking about authority, I feel some authority myself in talking about attention, is that I have defined authority very broadly to be everything about being the grown-up in relation to the small. For a while they're small, then they get bigger, but this person who's dependent on you. So part of your authority is your presence, which includes curiosity and attention, but also the values that you use to create your household, your nonverbal behavior, your eye contact, you're putting down the device to show the kid that you're there, you're reading to them at night. So that I just like to put the attention in the context of something broader. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So this book is fascinating for so many reasons, but as you said, it's not a book of how-tos, but a book of how to think about parenthood. And I am intimidated talking to a clinical psychologist because I realize that every question I'm asking could potentially be reframed, and so feel absolutely free to throw it all back at me and reframe it. But what is it fair to ask even what the goal of parenting should be?
I thought you were going to say what the goal of the book was. So that's easier than what the goal of parenting.
Answer that first then. Answer the easier question first, and then we can come back to it.
Yeah, it's not that the other one's so hard. It's sort of it's a different angle, but I'll try to answer both. And, let me know if I'm going sort of too far off course. The goal of my book was to give the parents the message that parenthood is a relationship, and to reassure them that there's not any one right way to be a parent. And again, I'm going to move away from parenting to be a parent and to parenthood, because I see parenting more as a matter of techniques and strategies. And I know it's used more broadly and loosely in the culture, but I really like to sort of get back to the basics, which is this relationship between a hopefully mature, but certainly somewhat grown up person who's had a child. And by the way, as soon as you have the kid, you got to be the grown up because you have responsibility. So I suppose I don't think of it in terms of goals, because does any relationship have a goal? What's the goal of marriage? What's the goal of what's the goal of friendship? And you could say that the goal in all of any human relationship is to connect, is to support, and is to develop a way to be together in the world that helps each of you navigate your way. And I suppose the parent, I'm 70, I have 4 grown kids. they're in their 30s and 40s now. So it won't be long before they'll probably be helping me navigate my way. And now we're in this sort of middle ground of they have kids and, I'm retiring and we're sort of getting to a different phase. But, obviously a parent is more supportive to a kid than a kid needs to be to a parent. And in fact, that's a trap for a lot of parents, that they're looking for support and friendship from their children. And that is not the goal.
What's wrong with friendship with your child?
Well, you can have some friendship, and I certainly have great friendships of different kinds with my sons and my grandchildren. But at the bottom line, when you're a parent, particularly when your kids are still dependent on you, is that the buck does stop with you. You create the household, you pay the rent, you choose the neighborhood and the school. Now, obviously, there may be discussions about that, but and hopefully there's a discussion with your co-parent. And I talk about co-parent rather than spouse or partner. There's so many different ways to be parents together. You don't have to be living together. But your values matter and your experience matters. So if you want to spend your day negotiating with a person who's not mature and hasn't yet developed their values and is, working their way through, maybe it's an adolescent with raging hormones. Yeah, be my guest. But, and you do certainly have to negotiate some moments. But what I guess you could say the goal of my book is really to give parents more confidence to be the grown-up and to trust that if they show their kid this sort of responsive attention and curiosity and love and support and somewhat predictable, consistent limits, then their kid, they don't have to worry about their kid hating them, blaming them, not liking them. There'll be moments, but overall, you want a child to feel a sense of trust and reliance on you, and not that you're relying on them.
Right. I'm really enjoying your book. It so happens I'm reading it during a time of transition in my career and at the beginning of adolescence for both our girls who are 12 and 14, and I'm getting so much out of it, and it's intimidating reading it to some extent because I pride myself on being a dedicated and good father. And some of my longtime listeners have given me great compliments on how vulnerable I've been about talking about my parenting successes and failures. But I don't know what kind of a father I am, and I'm not sure how much I care about how people see me. I only want to be seen as somebody who's constantly trying to get better and being curious. That being said, it was interesting because you talk about authority in your book, and that word has always been a one I've used to describe as not necessarily being the most important quality of being a parent. And what I mean by that is specifically, I didn't want to be this authoritarian father. I didn't ever want to be the father who yelled at my kid or even said to my kid, "You're going to do it because I'm your father and I said so." And I've said that, Dr. Moore, so many times. So what do you mean? No, I've not said that phrase so many times. I've said that I've used that as an example of being an authoritarian. But you use this phrase called natural authority. What are we talking about when it comes to the authority? And does it have anything to do with what I just said? I'm your father, I'm your parent, and I said so. That's why.
Well, it has something to do with it in the sense that that is what may be behind some of the limits or directives or requirements that a parent makes. But it doesn't necessarily need to be explicit. It may often be implicit in the history of your relationship. But I want to roll back a couple of things. So I'm going to talk about authoritarian in a second. But first, I want to just, before I forget, you talked about successes and failures, and I have noticed on different podcasts and websites this focus on, what are my successes and what are my failures?
Metrics.
And well, I know these exist, moments when you say, man, that was great. That was a great outing or that was a great exchange. I really kind of resist thinking of them as successes and failures because it's too judgmental. And again, if you think about it as a relationship that is ongoing moment by moment and interaction by interaction, yeah, you might have a tough interaction, but is it really a failure? And so, and believe me, I can think of a few things that I wish I hadn't done, or ways I had been. But I would love it if parents thought less about whether they were succeeding or failing. I think it's great for parents to look for help when you feel you're struggling. And often people look for help too late. But I just resist the success and failure. So that's one thing. And we can pick up on that more if you want. But the other part is also hugely important. So, and I'm really glad you brought it up. When I was writing the book, my working title was The Natural Authority of Parents. And then when time came to actually name it, I realized I had to have a subtitle that sort of explained it a little better. And I played around and I came up with this Being the Grownup. But I sort of crowdsourced it to a group, a list I call children of my friends and friends of my children, who are people in my target audience, if you will. And a few people said, you can't put authority on the front of your book. No one will buy it. And I said, well, that's going to be a problem because that's what it's about. And so I wanted to come up with a title that communicated something about authority that might be a little different. So I kept natural authority and I used grown up. And I put on a Google alert maybe 2 or 3 years ago for natural authority. And what that means is it's just called a Google alert. And every time somewhere out in the wild internet, natural authority is used, you'll get an email telling you.
Yeah, and to give you an insight in me and a lot of other people, the only Google alert I have set for is Pete Dominic
Yeah, right.
and narcissism also. Anyway, so you have a Google alert.
So I did natural authority because I thought I came up with this phrase and I thought, does anyone else use this? And I'm sort of curious. Well, it gets used 9 out of 10 of the Google alerts, although I'm happy to say a few of the recent ones are my book. But 9 out of 10 are about an athlete or a coach. He walks across the court with natural authority. He handles the ball with natural authority. And I love that because one of the things that I emphasize in the book is that we are bodies. We are not just a brain perched on the top of a body. We have a nervous system that goes up and from head to toe, and we are responding to each other and to the world at all times with that nervous system. And so part of the way I talk about parenthood and being a parent with natural authority is your presence. And you need to feel the confidence to communicate that confidence to your children. And that's part of what really started me on it, because I worked clinically with parents. So I thought, why? They seem to be doing the right techniques, but why isn't it working? And sometimes they were inconsistent, and sometimes the spouse or co-parent was undermining them. But a lot of times they just weren't communicating with much confidence. So in a way, authority is confidence. The third thing I want to make sure to say is that authority does not equal authoritarian. In 1966, there was an article published, it may have been a dissertation originally, by a woman who just died last year named Diana Baumrind, who is a psychologist out at Berkeley and who made a study of styles. I guess she called them parenting styles. And she used two, just to really simplify it, there were two matrices. One was respondingness and one was demandingness. And there were 4 parenting styles. On one end was permissive, and a permissive parent was high in respondingness, but low in demandingness. And on the other end was authoritarian, who was high in demandingness, but low in, not respondingness, responsiveness, low in responsiveness. Then the authoritative parent was one who was high in responsiveness, but also high in demands. And then finally, the fourth was the disorganized style, where there was a lot of inconsistency and there was no real pattern. And, there's authoritative is a bit of an ideal. It probably comes closest to what I'm working on in my book, but I really believe that there are lots of different ways of having a relationship with your kid. And some people are simply more comfortable with a more permissive situation, the style. But there's finally going to be a bottom line. Is the kid going to go to school? Are you so permissive that
right.
or does it matter if they can have whatever they want for lunch, or they can have a candy bar? So there's, obviously many levels of decision making. But so that's, if you think of authoritative rather than authoritarian, you'll be closer to what I'm describing.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you explained that. You mentioned also the inconsistency just now, and you write about this a lot in the book. Consistency, the difference between those two when it comes to being the adult in the relationship, the parent. Why does, if I understand you right in reading the book, why is consistency so important?
Well, one of the things that I have learned about in the last few years, I listened to a wonderful podcast called the Brain Science Podcast, and it introduced me, to neuroscience. And I'm an amateur. It's not something I studied professionally, but I have a couple of shelves of books and I've listened a lot. And one of the things I've learned about the brain is that they now call it a prediction machine. So you are constantly sort of, if you think of yourself in almost like a worm moving across the ground, you're sort of sensing what's ahead and what's about to happen, and you're making predictions so you know how to behave. And that's a gross simplification.
Yeah, okay.
But if you then bring that back to a child, and you start with an infant, and they get to be able to expect a big face to smile at them, to look at them kindly, to touch them gently, as opposed to snarl at them, to be short with them, to be irritable with them. Now, you could say they're both consistencies. So that's, in a way, makes that a bit of a tricky concept. So I just wanted to get that out there that, you can be consistent in a bad way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is something that I guess it comes with this sort of having a pattern of curiosity and engagement. So, and the consistency that is most important, as much as you can develop it, is with your co-parent, so that the child doesn't have the ability to worm his way in, as it were, between the two of you. And it's obviously much more difficult when people are living in different households. And I just saw Marriage Story last night, living on different coasts. And you may have to agree to disagree, and then you have to depend on the kid to develop, to figure out the kind of relationship they had with you. So, so I guess I'm thinking of consistency. It maybe needs to be modified, that you want the kid to know what to expect. If what the kid learns to expect is real strictness, and I'm not talking about abuse, but I mean real strictness and firmness, even that is pretty good, because then at least they know what to expect. And you'll talk to a lot of people my age who say, I knew that I couldn't come home late. I'd get in trouble. I knew that I had to make my bed or do my chores or whatever it was. I knew that we sat down for dinner at a certain time.
Right. So,
and my granddaughter would say that's kind of old, old fogey, old school, maybe. But you do have a personality as a parent. You are a person, and you have to figure out sort of, where you come down. And I would say, if worse comes to worse, I'd rather you be predictable and be pretty strict than you be inconsistent and disorganized about it. Because then your kid doesn't know what the heck to do. So I don't know. It's simple and complicated at the same time.
Well, it's all complicated, but you do a great job simplifying it, and you have all these really great narratives that outline in depth every aspect of what we're talking about here. So people should get the book. I also appreciate that this book relies on both your career and your clinical work, as well as a wide range of research in psychology, different types of psychology, as well as, you mentioned, neuroscience, and then historical and sociological studies. But to me, I guess the one that's most interesting is talking about the anthropology component, that idea, because so much has changed over time, and the way that my community is in, just north of New York City is much different than a community in Portland, Oregon, where they all use flip phones, and that's okay. But now, if you don't have a smartphone by 5th grade, you also don't have any friends. And I'm just talking about the vast differences in culture in our country, much less other countries. So, talk to me a little bit about the idea of why anthropology matters and how you researched from that field of study.
Well, how did I first encounter, when I was writing my master's, which was on sibling interaction. Actually, even before that, I got very interested in language development. And just because I'm so relationship oriented, I became intrigued with how language emerges, between people. And there's some controversy about whether language is innate or whether it's social. And I see it as much more social. But I became exposed to a couple of anthropologists, one at NYU and one who's now at USC, and then eventually to a group at UCLA. And they have, for anyone who's interested in seeing how anthropologists look at our society today, it's called the Center for the Life of the Family, I believe. But they have a book called Fast Forward, in which this group of anthropologists, the one I'm closest to is named Marjorie Harness Goodwin, looked at, had video teams in 30 different families' homes for a week. Mm-hmm. And looked at how parents and children engaged with each other, how they got through the day with each other, how much stuff they had, how they managed the stuff. So it was really, I love this because I am someone who's very sensitive, as I said, to relationships, but also to the context I'm in. So as you know from having the book, one of my chapters is called Habitat.
Yes, I love it.
On the one hand, that's ecological. Like we too are animals and we create nests and habitats. But our habitats are also, because we're humans, shaped by culture and values. And if you step back and sort of say, okay, what is it like for my kid to be growing up in this household as opposed to a household in Portland, Oregon? What's it like to be going to a private school or a public school? What's it like to be in an urban neighborhood or a rural neighborhood? And these are the anthropologists do a lot more than that, but I was sort of taking it at a fairly, everyday level. Also, what's fascinating is what kids learn to do or don't learn to do. And there was I'm trying to remember. It's an academic article that someone wrote about it in the New Yorker a few years ago too, about the difference in the kinds of things kids are exposed to and the kind of responsibilities they're given. And I don't remember the tribe, but I do have this anecdote in my book. In some places where knives are important, very young children will be allowed to handle, even encouraged to handle knives at a very young age, say 3. Because they have to learn how to handle knives, but they're also taught how to handle them, or they're handling them in the context of other people handling them at the same time. So, if you compare that to, we have to learn to show our kids not to put their fingers in the electric socket or how to cross the street. So right. There are things that we do that we don't even think about. And then there's more subtle stuff like eye contact. Literally, it's true that in some cultures, eye contact is considered rude and aggressive. But in my world, it's something I really emphasize because I think it's more common. Again, I don't want to talk too much out of school here because I'm not an anthropologist, but eye contact is a way to connect. But there are other ways to connect.
But at the same time, I've read that if I'm talking to my child and I'm being stern, and they're not looking at me, and I say that, that phrase, look at me when I'm talking to you, now I've maybe intimidated them and they can't think clearly because I'm demanding this eye contact. And sometimes maybe it's better for them, especially when they're very young, to not be looking at me. I know my dad had this piercing gaze that I could feel, went right through my soul when he was upset with me.
But what was the effect of that? So did that make a difference in how you listened to what he said?
I think it probably did.
I think it's Tina Fey who had a great sentence that was, I wish I could give my kids just a little bit of the anxiety that my father gave me.
That's funny.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And I often say when I'm talking to groups, if you want to talk to an adolescent, it's probably good to do it while you're driving them somewhere at night. So you don't have to look at each other. And in fact, it's dark.
That's so interesting, as I've had two of the best conversations with my daughter, my 14-year-old, in the past 6 months in the dark.
Yeah. So, and it's also, if you sit on the side of the bed when they're going to sleep. So it doesn't always, eye contact isn't the be all and end all. I do think it depends what their eyes are looking at instead of you. If it's a screen, absolutely. You're not going to engage their attention if they're doing something else at the same time. Well, it could be reading a book. You kind of need to make sure you have their attention. And when we had a dog who's now gone, but we got him after our kids were gone, so we had a little time to actually pay attention to the dog in our lives. And one of the books we bought is by the Monks of Skeet, who I think might be up your way. And they talked about the importance of getting the dog's attention before you tell them what to do. So Bobby, sit. And not sit, Bobby, because you got to get his attention first.
Right.
And same with kids. So I agree with you. You don't have to do the piercing gaze, although I bet sometimes that piercing gaze is useful. And you shouldn't be afraid at times of being that stern. One of the stories in my book is about getting it's actually based on my own story, but I sort of make it a little bit more generic, about a grandmother getting a kid out of the house. And there was a point where I was finally getting frustrated. I say the grandmother finally gets frustrated, but she makes it happen. How? Probably because she got just a little more stern. Or it might be one of my favorite parenting books, Books of Techniques, is 1 to 3 Magic by Thomas Phelan, Phelan. And he really simplifies it. He's got this sort of system. And if children have learned that system with you, then you might not need to be so stern. You just have to say, that's one. And then if they don't stop, you get that's two. So there's different ways of communicating it. But I wouldn't be entirely afraid of it. You're not going to damage your kid. And if you felt that was the only way your dad ever looked at you and that was the only way he could get you to do anything, then, we could talk about that more. But I don't think that per se is necessarily bad. And people may be shocked by that.
Yeah, I'm not shocked by anything, because I'm in reading your book and talking to you, because I feel like your breadth of experience and the research with which you put into it it's based on a lot of truth, a lot of experience, and tremendous credibility that you have. But I do feel that, and I really want to know what you think about this, that my generation of parents, I'm in my 40s, it has it much different and to some extent more difficult than any generation before us, because of the ubiquity, is that the word, of the screens. The screens are everywhere all the time. And I have no problem admitting here on the show that we definitely made some mistakes. We were far too lenient, especially with my younger daughter, who's now 12. Maybe we gave it to her too early, but she has become addicted to it in the way that reminds me of a drug addiction. And she's also in a relationship with a boy. And so she's constantly talking to him. And I could give you many examples of the damage that I think that they're doing. But my main question is it that much different, Dr. Moore, this generation with these screens than previous generations who didn't have them everywhere all the time?
I think it is. I think 5 years ago, I might have been less likely to say yes. But I think we all know that, it's inescapable in a way now that it wasn't inescapable before. That said, about 10 years ago, before I had written the book and I'd started to think about these things, I was trying to publish an article, and I showed it about technology, and I showed it to a writing group, and they said, this isn't about technology, this is about authority. And I laughed. But what that meant was that even if it is different for you, even if it is harder because of this sort of planetary addiction, our species, our human bodies have not yet, they may yet change, but I don't think we've evolved yet to not still need the things we needed when I was raising my kids and when my parents were raising me. So we still need touch. We still need human relationships. We still need social skills to navigate the workplace. I mean, unless we're working remotely in front of a computer at a desk and never talk to anyone. But who wants a life like that? So, it is different. Yes, I don't want to be an old fogey and act like, oh, can't you just be like we were? But, and I think, I don't know if I said it in the end in the Atlantic article. I know I said something like this, that yes, the world has changed, but children have not. They still need us in this deep way to be other people, and they need each other. And there is, and again, I'm not up on this research, but I certainly, follow in a general way. There's real concern among people who do work with kids that kids are losing their social skills because they're doing it all by the phone. Now, I have a 15-year-old granddaughter. Her phone is attached to her body in a way. I joke about it that way. And we've had some good conversations about it. It's different. That, I would stay on the phone for 3 hours with my boyfriend. So was that worse? Maybe not. But so it is good to remember that they're engaged with something. And then I do think you have to take your authority seriously and get all the resources to bear that you can to figure out what limits a 12-year-old girl should have in relation to the screen. And if you're truly, and I won't put your daughter on the spot, but if a parent is concerned that a child is addicted, then that's something to really talk about with that kid.
Yeah.
And not to throw up your hands. Or throw up one's hands.
Yeah, no, we did I think I would call it an intervention. Both my wife and I sat down with her and we blamed ourselves. We said, listen, it was, we have allowed this, you to have this device and for you to basically have free will with it. And now we are going to be, as you call it, the natural authority. We're going to set some standards and we're going to be, as you say, more consistent about those standards. So that leads me, I guess, unfortunately, to my final question, because I want to talk to you for the next 10 hours. But what if you basically, I don't know, give me permission, give the reader, the parent permission that if to change, you can take the opportunity back. If you haven't been this natural authority, if you haven't played this or that role in your child's life up until now, you still can. Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. You can get it back?
Well, I think you just gave a fabulous example of it in telling your own story. You and your wife realized that things had gone too far. You were worried about the health and development of your daughter. So you, as you said, made an intervention, which required you, I presume, to be a somewhat different kind of parent, have change the nature of your relationship with her, at least around this, technology or mobile device. I do think it's never too late to change. It can be hard, and sometimes you might need someone like me, in clinical practice to help you. Or you might need the support of your peers. I was speaking at a school in New York the other day and learned about a program you may have heard of called Wait for Eighth, which is a program for parents to band together to limit, not to give their child a device until the 8th grade. Yeah. And then know who the other parents are who've agreed to that so that you have a peer group. Yeah. Because we do need each other's support. And the hardest thing, and I've heard of these stories, is when one parent believes it's important and the other doesn't care. And then you've got another kind of intervention required. And then I would really encourage you to have meet with a couples therapist, and because it's that important. It's that important. Yeah. So yes, you can change. You may need help. Don't be afraid to get it. If you can't get it from books or people, see if you can find it from a professional, because it's really important.
Well, I hope to do part 2 with you, because there's so much in your great, great new book that I didn't get to. Being the Grownup, Love, Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenthood is such a good book. You come highly recommended from my friend Lenore Skenazy, and you certainly did not let me down. I am forever in your debt for this conversation, and more importantly, just for having read your book. Here at the end, though, I know that you're retiring now, and I wonder, Just a personal question. When you look back at your practice, helping so many people over so many years, how do you look back at it? How do you measure it? And or is that even an inappropriate question?
Well, it's very new. This is my last week. And I have all my clients know, so I feel comfortable, making it public because it is a very private kind of work. And I'm saying goodbye. I'm not having a retirement party. I can't, my clients don't know about each other. They know they exist, but so it's a lot of goodbyes.
That's a great comedy sketch right there.
Yeah, well, I actually, one of them said, I can see it now. All of us crying and drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes together.
That's great.
But it's probably too early to know how I'm going to look back on it. But I would say I've been lucky to have had a lot of relationships with a lot of people. I think I have made a difference in some lives, and sometimes I've been surprised by the differences, by the difference I've made. I've heard from people later. I love hearing from people I've seen, after some period of time, because I would have said something or had an effect that I had no idea. But to get back to where we started the conversation with Mr. Rogers, I talk about this in that short piece, which is, as a therapist, what am I doing? I'm giving focused attention, engagement, and curiosity to one person or two, if it's a couple, session after session, and building a relationship with them. So it's sort of, I've been aware of this, for a long time, even before I was doing clinical work. And I hope that I carry it out in my future life, just personally and in my family, as well as having done it clinically.
Well, congratulations on an amazing career. Congratulations on the book. And I look forward to hopefully talking with you about it again. And thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Adelia Moore. You can follow her on Twitter as well. And that's Adelia Moore, PhD. But go get the book. It's so enlightening. It taught me a lot about myself. And I got emotional reading it. I had my mind open so much reading it. And people have talked about me being a good parent. And it always feels very good to hear that kind of a thing. But I think it's an ongoing learning experience every day, every hour. And I certainly felt that way in reading your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm just so pleased that it connected with you so well, and really fun to talk.
Absolutely.
All
okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Care.
Well, I hope that was as enjoyable for you as it was for me. It's hard, that kind of interview with that kind of guest, to ask the right questions. But I read a lot of her book and prepared as well as I could. Still don't feel like I got to the questions as quickly as I wanted to, but I learned a lot. I think the answer to the question is yeah. Can always be a better parent. There's no right or wrong way to parent, and there's way too much judgment in parenting, including from me. So I apologize for that. That being said, how about a judgment, huh? Your kids aren't going outside enough, and frankly, neither are mine. The Children of Nature Network is an amazing organization that I've been involved with and supported for a few years now. I hosted their conference in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and that's where I first learned of my next guest's work. Angie Hanscom is doing amazing things to get and keep kids outside and learning outside as well. She's done a fascinating and unique thing at the time we need it most. She's created a program called TimberNook to get kids outside. She's written a book about it as well. She lives up in New Hampshire. I talked to her on Skype. It's not the most perfect sound, but it's definitely worth listening to. I learned so much. She has great ideas, great advice, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Sit still. Stop fidgeting. Has anybody ever told that to you? Just say that to your kids now. Do you fidget? Can you pay attention? I was recently in my daughter's open house class with the teacher there, and I was sitting in those stupid desks for like 5 minutes. Not even. I just started moving around. My back was hurting. I was looking around. It was so uncomfortable, and I realized, oh my gosh, this was how I was when I was little too. I can't learn this way. It's not how I learn, and I hate the tests, and I was left-handed, and there was never a left-handed desk, and it was just all so annoying. Hated the factory that we called school. I like the social life, I like the kids, I like playing, but the academics just weren't for me. And I know they aren't necessarily for a lot of your kids. We talk parenting here on Stand Up, and my guest today comes highly recommended by a previous guest on this podcast, Lenore Skenazy of Free Range Kids, and my good friend, nature writer and author Rich Louv, who wrote the foreword to her book. By trade, she is a pediatric occupational therapist, whatever that is. We're going to figure that out. And she's the founder of TimberNook.com, the author of a book called Balancing Barefoot, How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. Very happy to welcome Angela Hanscom to the show. Angie, you prefer, though. Hi, Angie.
Hi.
Thank you so much. You're sitting in beautiful, rural New Hampshire, I think, right? That's where you live?
Yes, very rural.
Tell me about where you live real quick, and you're raising your family there. It must be an awesome place to. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Vermont, which is pretty rural as well,
nice.
And Maine. So we live right in between those two states.
So you've lived in Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire?
Yeah, all three now.
Oh my God. I always lump them together in terms of their natural environment. Obviously culture is different, but is there any way for you to categorize and generalize and do an injustice in such a short answer to the difference between those three states?
Sure. Let's see. Vermont, I think of farms and Ben and Jerry's.
Nice.
And then Maine is right on the coast, so lobsters. And then New Hampshire is right in the middle, and it's kind of a combination of both, actually. Oh,
I like. Well done. Very well done. That's certainly parts of how I see them. All right, so let's first talk about your education. Formerly, you're educated. You have your master's in pediatric occupational therapy. What is that job? Why did you want to do that job? And what did you do before? Obviously, you evolved into everything that you are now.
Okay, sure. So I wanted to actually be a physical therapist until I worked for a summer camp, ironically, because now we run programs in summer camps. And I really wanted to work with the whole child. I wanted to work with not just the physical component, but so that kind of led me down the path for occupational therapy. And then occupational therapy is working with a child and really helping them to be more independent with their occupation. And an occupation of a child is play. And we're very good as occupational therapists to work on indoor play. But I kept thinking, why are we not addressing outdoor play? It's becoming a lost occupation for children. And so that's kind of where I came in. That's
interesting that even in your master's studies, even your formal education, that you weren't, they didn't have the kid go outside and play in the woods, and just in terms of developing and solving the problems they were having. It was all indoor, like a personal trainer, like tools and stuff like that.
So we actually work typically we work in buildings. So we work in schools, or we work in hospitals, or we have sensory clinics. So we engineer sensory experiences inside. For instance, like a fake balance beam with engineered to be sensory with little pickies on it. And swings are indoors. Everyth's inside.
All right. So what brought you to this? Like, was there an epiphany? Was there a moment? Was there a child where you're like, we got to try to do occupational therapy outside?
Well, yeah, actually, when I was working in a therapy clinic, a couple things happened that kind of got me on this path. One was there was a rise of interesting sensory issues. Like I remember having a little boy come in and saying, I don't like wind in my face. And I remember thinking, how do I treat that in a clinic setting? Do I get a fan and blow the fan on him? A lot of kids not wanting to get dirty, messy on their fingers. And then number one issue we have to treat is kids are falling and getting more and more clumsy. And so that happened. And that the same, when I actually left the clinic to stay home with my children, I did private treatment outdoors, and I started to notice the benefits of, the sensory experience outside. And then when I had my own children, it became a very personal journey for me, especially when my daughter went to kindergarten and hearing of all the restrictions they're up against. The kindergarten teacher looked at us and said, this is not kindergarten like you remember growing up. She said, this is really like first grade. Your kids, we don't have time to work on cutting with scissors. She said, my husband's going to pre-cut everything at nighttime, so we don't have to worry about that. Then they had 5 minutes for snack. They're 5-year-olds, right? And she said, if that gets in the way of curriculum, it's going to become a working snack. And
so
then,
it's this battle that the kind of institutional educational ideas of curriculum and constant what is thought of as traditional education, teaching different kind of coursework, obviously reading and math, as opposed to what it sounds like you're saying, I'm no expert here, but treating the whole child. So play and stress and anxiety and mindfulness and a connection to nature, all of that. That's what you think. You're saying it's being pushed out by curriculum.
Yeah. So they keep saying there's no time for that. All the developmentally, the really important things for development.
Right. So then you decide at that point to start developing these more untraditional techniques and using nature, or what happened next?
So I actually pulled my daughter out of kindergarten and homeschooled for a couple of years because I just knew this wasn't right from a therapy standpoint. And then I really started looking at Finland and what kids are doing over there, where the kids are in the river dissecting fish to learn about it. And Reggio Emilia, where the environment inspires, education. And then what I noticed next was that there was less kids playing outdoors. So I started to be awakened to there's a neighborhood connected to us. And I remember driving through one day going, where are the kids? Why are there not children going to each other's houses? And that's how I played growing up. So I wanted to do something to get kids outside. And I started with nature classes. And I thought it was a great idea until I ran one. And I had a mother come up to me with her son in hand and say, can you tell my son why the leaves change color? And I knew it had something to do with a pigment, but I couldn't answer her question because I thought, first of all, I'm not a teacher and I'm not a naturalist or an environmentalist. What am I doing running nature programs? I'm an occupational therapist.
Oh, I would have come up with some bullshit answer, by the way. I would have been like, they're emotional. Now we got to move on. We have other things to do. So you question yourself because that wasn't your background? Right.
And so that's when I really started to wake up to, the occupation of a child's play. And because occupation is on a huge, outdoor play is on a huge decline, we're seeing a rise in these sensory issues and motor issues. And I thought, why are we not getting kids outdoors more? And then I really started to reflect on my background, and we're good at analyzing any activity or experience for its therapeutic value. So how it works on social emotional skills, to balance, to strength. And I started creating summer camps that worked on the whole child.
All right. We're going to talk about that, which became TimberNook, right? TimberNook.com, everybody. But you have this great blog there, by the way, and I know that the Washington Post reproduced a piece that you started at TimberNook.com, where you write, children are constantly in an upright position these days. It's rare to find children rolling down hills, climbing trees, and spinning in circles just for fun. Merry-go-rounds and teeter-totters are a thing of the past. Recess times have shortened due to increasing educational demands, and children rarely play outdoors due to parental fears, liability issues, and the hectic schedules of modern-day society, which I think that paragraph right there, Angie, does a really good job of characterizing. We've touched on it a little bit, but let me talk to you about parental fears. We've talked about that a lot. And of course, Lenore Skenazy and I spoke about that, but I wanted to have at least one, give you the opportunity to respond at least one time, your point of view on parental fears. Obviously, you live up there in kind of rural New Hampshire, but the fears are in every culture, urban, rural, suburban, right? Everybody, their parents all have them, and putting them on their kids and raising, as I call it, a nation of bedwetters. Maybe that's too harsh.
Absolutely. Yes. So there's a huge fear of children getting hurt is probably the biggest thing we come up against with TimberNook programming is, aren't kids going to get hurt out there because they're playing in the woods and climbing trees and, building forts. So, but it's actually what we found with talking to a researcher, Anita Bundy. She said they did a Sydney playground project, and she said the fear isn't necessarily that the child gets hurt. It's more of what other people think of them. So the parents were afraid of if their child got hurt, what other parents might think of them. And then teachers were afraid of losing their job if the child got hurt. So, but fear's a hard thing you can't see it. But it is one of the biggest barriers to this kind of outdoor play.
But it's interesting. So I always thought that the fear was just, generally speaking, that if your kid gets hurt, and they're in pain, then it makes you sad to see your child in pain, and it makes the child sad to be in pain. My daughter just had oral surgery, and it's not serious, but I realized the entire experience from the surgery, which, again, she's conscious, it's not serious, to the pain after. It sucks. She's miserable. I'm sad that she's miserable, but this is the type of adversity that will make her stronger. In the moment, it's not great when you're sick or when you're injured, but she also broke her arm when the first day of kindergarten. I think I brought that up with Lenore. These types of things are hard to see your kids go through, but don't they contribute to the social fabric of their future?
Yeah, and it helps with resilience.
That's what I meant.
Even like conflict. So we have the kids will have arguments and, wars out there in the woods, and the adults step back. And that's something because they need to learn conflict resolution skills and resilience through experience. If we constantly protect them from doing that, they don't gain those life skills. Exactly.
Expand on, because I know you wrote about this in your book, adults stepping back in your program, which again, I want to have you define. We'll do that next. TimberNook, which is all over the world now. It's amazing. But what is this adults step back? I don't like to step back. I like to be involved and offer solutions. And then that makes me feel good about myself. Right. Not helping though.
Yeah. So basically what we found over the years is let's say kids are building a fort, if we have an adult standing right there, right where the kids are building, we found the kids would turn to the adult and start seeking ideas and seeking reassurance. Is this okay? Getting permission. And also they would tattle on each other more if there was a huge adult presence. So over the years, what we found is if we actually gave them a big amount of space for their play and then got down and, we're a little hidden out there, but we can still supervise them for safety, that they would turn to each other to resolve their own conflicts. There was less tattling, and they would come up with their own play ideas, which is really important. We want to empower them to come up with their own play schemes.
So how did you come up with TimberNook? This is a nature program, a school. Explain what it is, and then I do want to explore a little bit about how you came to it.
Sure. So TimberNook is outdoor play experiences that are kind of grand scale. It's whole body experiences. So they might, for instance, be doing a giant marble run. Older kids might create a ball run in the woods using loose parts and duct tape and gutters and big pipes. And the adults step back. So the kids turn to each other and they, figure out how to do this. And it leads to more creative play. It's all a choice. So, which is really important because true play is a choice. And so we're seeing a reduction in anxiety for children because there's no pressure on the children to do things in a certain way. And for little kids, another example might be hearing the story Three Little Pigs, and then they design actually Three Little Pigs homes in the woods out of real bricks, giant sticks, and real hay, and of their own creation. So they're living and breathing the story. It's real experiences.
That's really cool. And so where there's TimberNook is all over the world, these programs. How have you kind of franchised it out and shared it outside of your own community?
Sure. So it's actually not a franchise. It looks like
Forgive my wording of it. I don't know what to call it. Yeah, go ahead. Explain.
Okay, sure. It's a licensed program, and we train providers, from all over the world. So we're in 5 countries: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, and United States. So they come here and train at our site, and then we fly out and we help them launch. And then it's ongoing support and training from that standpoint on. So I think it's really important to try to recognize the outcomes of programs like yours, and obviously honor your expertise. But how do
How do you measure progress? Because it all sounds really good. And anecdotally, I certainly feel like it's all true, but you can't really do a randomized controlled blind study on children's play, can you? You can't. How do you know that a kid's issues are not necessarily solved, but certainly on the way to being solved? Because it seems now, obviously, the main issue is attention deficits disorders, and everybody's being diagnosed, and then a lot of kids are being drugged up, where a solution like the one that you're offering might be a far better way. But how do you know that it's working in terms of scientific proof?
Sure. Well, there's a bunch of different ways. One is anecdotal, and one of it is actually through experience. So for instance, we have a program where we're actually going into the public schools too. So we're now training teachers.
Oh, nice.
Implement this program during the school day. And so we got into our first public school in Illinois, and they are strategically inviting key people out. Like the physical therapist goes out and says, for instance, this is working on IEP goals I cannot replicate in a clinic setting. The kid is doing something that, I've been working for months on doing, but it's because it's his choice and he's inspired by the environment and the other children. But the other thing is we've been doing research with the University of New Hampshire. So we found higher quality of social interactions when you compare a TimberNook environment to a typical playground or a backyard type scenario. And then we're also now working with them again to look at executive functioning. So being able to initiate their own ideas and then execute them.
That's really interesting. I mean, how much do you really seriously think about, Angie, and study the ADHD diagnosis and all of the drugs that go along with it?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of the issues you'll see in a classroom environment, actually, they don't exist out in the woods because you've completely changed the environment. So what you're seeing as inattention in the classroom it's not even relevant out in the woods because it's meaningful to them. And so because play is so meaningful and motivating, it changes the game for these kids. It levels the playing field for children. So so if you went to go visit a child that had ADHD, for instance, in the woods, we've heard this a lot with teachers going, I don't even, you can't tell who has any kind of special needs out there and who doesn't.
Huh. That's really interesting to hear from a teacher. What about, we're talking in what seems like the dead of winter. It's December. Everything is, we're approaching the shortest day of the year. So light, it becomes a question. The leaves are all gone. The color is all gone. How do you encourage parents and educators to get their kids in nature during this time of year, especially people like you who live up in the Northeast? It's even tougher, I would imagine.
It's actually easier than we think. It's just really proper clothing. And there is grant funding for this for schools to get proper gear. But if they're dressed properly, it's really not an issue. The only time we'll cancel is if it's like a giant snowstorm and no one can get there, or if it's freezing rain for safety. But for the most part, they're out there in all weather. Right.
Yeah, I grew up skiing, and I think almost less about the actual act of flying down the hill, which is obviously the best part and why it's worth going through all the putting on the boots and putting on the gear because it's so worth it. But just the idea of being on that chairlift or being out in the middle of a run on a cold day and hearing nothing. And I realize how much less I do that, and we generally do that as human beings in the colder months. We just don't go outside as much, and it must have an effect on us one way or the other.
Absolutely. If we're always designed to seek comfort, then we never, like you said earlier, we're never challenging our senses, our thinking, and even like our reasoning. We do need to challenge ourselves.
How, if you homeschooled your daughter, you said, if you were the Secretary of Education and you were designing a school itself, every day when I drop my daughters off, which I usually do, I just think of them walking into this big brick factory where they are forced to be in this class and have that teacher and be with those students. And they have, as you write and talk a lot about, very little choice in the matter of where they sit, what they do. And when they do socialize, by the way, and they get plenty of socializing on their phones, and I don't think that's all bad, but when they do socialize at school, it's like, stop talking. What are you doing talking? It's like, I'm a human. But how would you change, I'm sure, radically? Is there a model out there, a Waldorf, a Montessori type of idea that you would include or replicate? What would you do to create your school?
Well, I think.
Do we need algebra?
Yeah. Well, I think what we're doing here at TimberNook is pretty exciting because it's all through play, and play is highly motivating. And so you can learn and you're going to retain more information when it's done through child-initiated play. Like that ball run, for instance, what we're doing is we're creating extension activities. So they have this play experience. Then they can bring it in after and reflect on the physics of it or the science, or they can write about their experience. But it doesn't have to be all book work. I feel like they do have to experience these things firsthand. And play trumps everything. It trumps fears. It trumps a lot, and it's motivating. So I would bring in more play.
So your ideas and work does work inside, right? I mean, you can't be outside all day, every day.
Right. So the way we've designed our program to work with schools is they have a specific time where they're outside, and then they can bring in extension activities that meet Common Core and next generation science standards. So it literally is curriculum for schools.
You talk about how I was reading and watching, preparing to talk to you, and this one really stuck with me because you talk about how kids don't like getting their hands dirty, and as a occupational therapist, you understand this intimately because I guess your expertise lies in all of the different senses: touch, right, feel, smell, and so on. And the idea of having some substance on your fingers, on your hands. I suppose anybody throughout the history of human civilization could have that on a spectrum like everything else. But you're saying that things have changed the less we've gotten muddy, dirty, gotten our hands out there dirty, no matter what.
Yeah, so a lot of kids are not tolerating getting dirty. And if you think about it, that light touch sense for some children, like getting glue on you or a little bit dirt, is aversive neurologically. So the way we override that is through deep pressure. They actually have a brushing program that therapists do. But if you think of outdoor play, and let's picture being on the beach for a moment, when you were touching that light touch, dirt, you were also digging deep and running your hand on the beach. And so that you were getting deep pressure, which actually helps to integrate that light touch sense and override that feeling of aversion. The same was true with climbing a tree, when you might feel sap in your hands when you're climbing, but because you're getting resistance to the joints and muscles as you climb, you're integrating that light touch sense and overriding that aversion. So what's happening is some children, all they do is they go home and they play video games. And they're not getting deep pressure. They're not getting enough of that, and they're not getting an exposure to getting dirty. But when you think of outdoor play, a lot of times you're getting resistance while you're touching that light touch sense, and it helps to integrate it.
How have you personally, as a parent, dealt with the screens as a screen raising parent generation? I think I said that right. And what are the rules at TimberNook.com with screens? First, your own kids, which are how old now?
So 14, 11, and 4. So my children, it's a treat. They they watch a movie once a week. It's like once in a while, because when I was raising them, and what I was hearing from people is if they had screen time every day, people were eliminating that and saying you have half an hour of screen time a day. Then it was a sense of entitlement for children. And so they had to do that first before they could play outside. And so it was starting to replace that really important outdoor play, which is important for development.
A movie a week? My daughter watched like a season of Grey's Anatomy last night. We're terrible. And it's a constant fight, to the point that with my younger daughter, Julia, who is a complete addict to that phone. I mean, it's bad, and it's, I think, entirely our fault. Like, she started to resent us. It's the only issue we have with her. I mean, they're both great girls, but when we tell them to put down the phones, it's taken personally, and we're punishing them, and we're terrible parents, and it's a really wild ride. And we have not been, I don't think, very good at it. And I thought we were pretty good parents, but you have a completely different situation up there in the woods of New Hampshire. One movie a week. I like it. What about other kids? I mean, you guys are really kind of strict, or you ration that, which I think is great, but the problem often comes, and maybe we're getting outside your expertise, but the other kids have, unlimited screen time.
Right. So my daughter always says that she lives under a rock, but when she gets to high school, she'll have a phone and stuff. But it was really waiting until she really needed it versus more of a luxury. And I think it is really addicting. And it is replacing the kind of play that actually kids are desperately need to develop properly. So
yeah, not only does it seem addicting as much as when the phone, a lot of comedians are doing jokes about this that have kids, but when the phone is taken away, the kid just becomes depressed and like powers down and has no idea what to do with their life. And it's just sad and sick.
Yeah, definitely.
How about TimberNook? What are the rules about screens there? Do you utilize them?
There's no screens at TimberNook. No.
That's it.
Yeah.
They don't get them at all.
Nope.
Do they complain?
No, because they know that I think it's a relief. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a relief that they don't have to worry about checking their screen. It's their time to play and create societies in their own worlds out there. And it's super fun to watch them.
And of course, the other issue is and we touched on this earlier, but not really extensively. And this is this generation of kids. There's a childhood diabetes epidemic. So we have a childhood obesity epidemic. When you're outside, you're more likely to be moving. How important is physical movement in your program and in your teaching?
Yeah, well, it just happens naturally through play. And I believe children exercise through play. Like, we don't have to have formal exercise programs necessirely.
You guys don't run hills at TimberNook? They're not blowing a whistle and running sprints?
Oh, yeah. They're climbing up giant boulders, tree climbing. And actually, I feel like outdoor play is like cross-training. So it's using different muscles every time you climb a tree. That. You're always on the monkey bars and you're going to get blisters and, you're just not developing your whole hand versus every time a limb touches your hand.
That's when my daughter fell off the monkey bars to break her arm. They got rid of the monkey bars, I'm pretty sure. And maybe not as a result of that, but I mean, yeah, it's like they're taking away so many things off the playground to make it just be one big soft pit of, I don't know what you would describe it.
Yeah. And then kids are becoming more and more unsafe because they're not challenged enough.
Yeah, the outcomes are counterintuitive so often with all of this. You try to protect your kid, try to keep your kid happy, but the long term is they're terrified, they don't go outside, and they're miserable, they're depressed, they're anxious,
Absolutely.
Right? Angie, you guys are doing great work, and I really appreciate you talking to me. TimberNook.com, and her book is Balanced and Barefoot: How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, Capable Children. What else can I plug? Plug time.
You can also find us on Facebook. That's where we put all the research and latest articles about outdoor play.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate talking to you. I've learned a lot from preparing to talk to you and your work and your book and your program. I'd love to get my daughters in that program, maybe running, one of those programs at some point. It's a really, really fascinating and important idea, and you're doing great work. Angie, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Angie Hanscom and Dr. Adelia Moore, please check out their work and maybe get their books and maybe follow them and support what they're doing. That was a lot. I learned so much, and re-listening to it, going through it, making sure it sounds all right. And I got to say, I hope that was valuable to you. That was like worth the Patreon subscription alone, huh? See what I did there? Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Thank you very much for joining me today. Email me what question you want me to ask, what guests you'd like me to have, what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, and all of your ideas for anything, because I'm really becoming good personal friends with many of you. What a unique thing, and what a great thing this time where we all need a bit more friendship, kindness in our life. Thank you for all of yours. Talk to you on Friday.